Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. We are having absolutely no technical difficulties whatsoever. Everything is going really smoothly. All the people that are supposed to be here are here for this podcast. We've got it 100% under control. Right, Eric?
Absolutely. Tip-top shape.
Everything is great. Everything is great. Everything is grand. We are doing the podcast today that we teased quite a while ago. And the format of it has changed a little bit. Assistant producer Trevor contributed a little bit to the formation of what we're actually going to do here. So essentially what we're going to do as an excuse to talk more about David Popovich, but also for me to revel in swimming history.
Flex your nerd
we're going to
muscles.
do. That's right. I want to flex my nerd muscles and continue the tradition of doing stuff on this podcast that's interesting to me. And I don't really care if anyone else finds it interesting. It's interesting to me, and I would like to record it and see what other people think. So it is going to be a best junior swimmers podcast. Now, what format is that going to take? Arbitrarily, you'll see when we get to the first decade, that's right, we're going decade by decade, you'll see why we started, because I just really had somebody that I wanted to include in this podcast. And so honestly, we made an arbitrary cutoff so that we could include a discussion of that person. So it is the best junior swimmer of every decade, male and female, from 1960 on. And of course, the decades are divided 1960 to 69, 70 to 79, et cetera, et cetera. And how are we defining who's a junior and who's not? We're using the current FINA rules for who is a junior. And so for anyone listening to this who's not sure how the International Governing Body of Swimming decides who's a junior, it is based on your year of birth. Okay, as a male, you can compete as a junior up until the last year that you have eligible is the year that you turn 18. So the year that you turn 19, even if you're not 19 yet, and I think this is unfamiliar to U.S. audiences because we use a different system, even though you're not 19 yet, you cannot compete in FINA junior events. Okay? For female swimmers, it's the year that you turn 17 is your last year. So they've offset those by a year. It actually used to be offset by 2 years, and it used to be only a 2-year window. And there's actually is a it's not really going to be a factor in what we're discussing here. There's a minimum age for juniors, and that's the year you turn 15 for male swimmers and the year you turn 14 for female swimmers. So yes, I mean, somebody can check my birthday math, but in the process of coming up with this list, I did check what year everybody was born to see whether they were eligible for my made-up collection of junior rankings. Eric is not as into swimming history as me. He has promised that he will make witty interjections and help me at the end. He's going to take some notes. So when we get to the end, we're going to decide... We're going to at least have a discussion about how these various athletes from various eras compare to one another. Right, Eric? You ready?
About as ready as I could be.
So let's just get started. Let's get into the list because, as I said earlier, I'm so excited to do the first decade. We got 1960 to 1969, and my top junior swimmer of that decade is none other than Don Schollander. That's right, Don Schollander. I know there's probably a lot of Don Schollander fans like me out there. He was the first man to ever swim under 2 minutes in long course in the 200 free. He did that as a junior swimmer, and he took the world record all the way from 2 minutes down to 1:57. So really remarkable accomplishment. You might say he sort of was the Popovich of his day. He was also an Olympic champion in the 100 free, 200 free. He had a really strong 400 freestyle as well. And, he just really, I think the best way to compare this is if Popovich actually, this maybe is hinting at the comparison later. Of course, Popovich to beat him doesn't have to lower the world record by 3 seconds. I mean, that was a little bit easier to do, I think, in 1960 than it is today. But still, in my math, in the Chris DeSantis math that we're not going to get into in this podcast, I would say it'd be like if Popovich lowered the 200 freestyle world record by a full second while he's still a junior swimmer. That's the scale of what we're talking about with Don Schollander. And yes, he is the one athlete that is the sole reason why I wanted to start this in 1960. I just happen to be a giant Don Schollander swimming fan. There's a great story. I'm not going to tell it here on the podcast, but if you hunt down on the internet, you can find a great story about Don Schollander and a little bit of gamesmanship with the French world record holder in the 100 free, Alain Godvalis, in the bathroom prior to racing the 100 free. So, Eric, any commentary on Don Schollander?
No, I think nothing really controversial. I mean, it's hard to understand the scale with which you created inside your head about the dropping the current world record by a second. I think you need to give Popovich just a little bit more wiggle room. We are talking about a superseded world record. So I think maybe even just breaking the 200 free record, this would definitely be an equivalent, taking it down 3 seconds back in the 60s versus Popovich breaking a suited record would be a bit more appropriate. But no, I think I appreciate you nerding out on this one. And, it's not every day that name gets thrown around. I'd be curious to see if any of your swimmers would.
Oh, definitely none of my swimmers. But some of them listen to this podcast, and that is one of the reasons I'm talking about it, because I want them to learn about Don Schollander.
And that's why I'm here too, because I don't nerd out on 60s competitive swimming as much as some.
Bonus points to anybody in Jersey Wahoo's senior group who comes and talks to me about Don Schollander. Okay, female category. We have Debbie Meyer. She was a triple Olympic champion while she was still junior eligible. 200, 400, 800 free, sort of like the Katie Ledecky of her time. Debbie Meyer. And actually she was the first swimmer to be a triple Olympic gold medalist in swimming. Now, there's a caveat to that, right? In that, the event sets were a little bit more limited in different eras. So, it wasn't necessarily as possible. But she was really fast for her time, really, really dominant, and she did it at a young age. And I should say, I think one of the challenges of putting this list together, Eric, and you don't need to be a swim nerd to think about this, is, for any given decade, you can find one, maybe two, if it's like a really good decade, 3 male swimmers that were junior age eligible that are world class. And so it's pretty short list that you just have to compare those two to each other. When you get into the female swimmers, every decade there's 10, 15 really, really good junior age eligible female swimmers that, you have to at least consider for everything like this. And that's a trend that even goes back beyond the 60s. And I think still, despite the rising ages of things, it still carries through to today. We still see really, really good world-class swimmers from junior-aged females.
And we will continue to see it as the internet has shown us, just by sheer knowledge that these things are capable at these ages, is going to continue to inspire kids to push for these things, as we're seeing a lot of in the U.S. on the junior women's side, just how young the national team is becoming over the last year plus.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to the next decade. We're going to go 70 to 79. For male swimmer, I had Brian Goodell. Okay. Then now we're getting in probably some names that a lot more people know, at least if you're, around the age Eric and I, you've probably heard and you've read anything about, swimming. You know who Brian Goodell is. But just for context, as a junior age swimmer, he was the world record holder in the 400 freestyle and the 1500, and his 1500 holds up extremely well in a modern context. Okay, there's a whole book written essentially about the Olympic final that he won, and it was because even that Olympic final holds up extremely well today. So he gets points both for being very, very good in his era, but also good retroactively. I mean, he went, I think, 351 in the 400 free in the 1970s, which is sort of, even in 2022, puts you, I guess, probably just outside of, like a decent making it back international level in the 400 free today. And his 1500 free is even closer than that. And that probably, historically is just an interesting trend for anybody to see which events improve more over time. And whether it's a factor too, I mean, maybe it's not so much about people not improving in the 1500 free, but somebody like Brian Goodell being pretty amazing for his time in the event. I mean, I think if you look back one Olympic cycle, the world record is something like 1550 something in the 1500, and it goes almost all the way down to 15 minutes in a span of 4 years. So that's a giant move in this event, and that's why I have to pick Brian Goodell on there. Brian Goodell fan?
Yeah, I actually fortunate enough to sit next to him at the 96 Olympics in Atlanta at a final session, which was really kind of wild. Down there with family as part of like 2 Christmases and 2 birthday presents combined. So it was like 2 years of that. So yeah, just happened to be at one of the evening sessions. I can't remember. It was one of the big women's relays that was won that night. And yeah, just shooting the bull with Brian Goodell during a finals way up in the nosebleeds at what is now Georgia Tech. So
yeah, and he's legendary for that, right? I mean, I think a lot of people know that he's beloved when he's at swim meets and he's doing exactly what you described. Yeah. He's around. Okay, the female category, I have to say, this was one of the hardest.
Oh, it has to be. Maybe
the hardest on the entire list. And this is probably the first point at which people are going to go. And let me just say, before I read off my name, I did put higher weight on having one extremely good performance over being broadly good at swimming. And so that is what led me to pick Mary T as my top junior swimmer of the 70s decade. That was when she set her first world record in the 200 fly. In a time, that is still quite competitive today. And I think, again, like Goodell, that's something that stands out to me and stands out to a lot of swimming fans, and makes them remember Mary T. Where this gets controversial is Tracy Calkins was also a junior age eligible swimmer in the 1970s. And I think if you're judging by sort of breadth of ability, Tracy Calkins is a better swimmer in terms of like overall. But I put more weight into the strength of one performance, so I went with Mary T. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's your criteria. I mean, it's
But Eric, you're on the podcast to give
no,
your opinions.
I am giving my opinion.
You got to have a Mary T versus Tracy Calkins opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, and you look at it like in a peak situation, and you look at the longevity of her times, and Mary T's best times are still finaling at international meets, which is mind blowing in and of itself.
Even her junior times, like I don't know that she was still junior eligible.
No,
I'd have to
not with her best
when
time,
she
like
went to 205, but she went 207 for sure as a junior swimmer, and that would have been in the World Champ Finals this summer.
And depending upon the way that a semifinal would go, I'd have to look at Tokyo to see where she makes it into that, but definitely right there inside top 10. It's I mean, I have a soft spot a bit for the Mary T thing too, because even though it was after her junior time, she posted some of these amazing times in and around my hometown. Despite your hate for
Brown Deer, Wisconsin, right?
In Brown Deer, Wisconsin, at the Schrader YMCA. I swam many meets there. Had some of the best meets and best experiences of my young life at that pool. So that's kind of like it's a bias that kind of gets thrown in there that you can't ignore. But no fault to Tracy, but
right. I also wanted to put her on there because at one point Brett Hawk was doing a most dominant swimmers series at some point, and he chose to put Patria Thomas as an example of a 200 butterflyer, completely ignoring Mary T. So
that's so weird.
Let's or maybe it was Susan O'Neill. It probably was Susie O'Neill because she's a bit better than Patria Thomas, but still, I don't think there's a comparison here. The only person in this era that comes anywhere near close was Calkins, and Calkins, just to give her one last little mention here, she won 5 world titles at age 15. And I tried my best to not penalize people for winning world titles versus Olympic titles, because a little bit is that, the Olympic only happens 4 years. So if you're not, at nearing the end of your junior time at the right time, that, you can't control that.
And a 6th medal is in a silver in the 100 breast. So very rare that you're getting anybody who's on the podium in the 100 breast as well as the 4 IM.
And these are both swimmers that really got screwed by the 1980 Olympic boycott, because they were sort of in their prime right at that moment. Okay. 1980 to 1989. Now, the female one for this is also going to get a little bit of spicy. Again, this is one I know is really going to trigger a lot of listeners of this podcast, because they're going to start knowing more of the swimmers, and I think so many of them are not going to like what I choose. But before we get to that, male category, I went with Alex Bauman, the Canadian IMer Alex Bauman, and I'll tell you why. Again, I'm looking at standout performance at a junior eligible age, and Alex Bauman actually had the world record in the 200 IM as a 17-year-old in the year that he turned 17. So still with an extra year to go in his junior eligibility, he was a world record holder. And I think if you look across this entire list, one of the easiest ways using the methodology of it was just to filter through, were there any male swimmers setting world records, while they were still junior eligible? For the most part, if you could do that, that separated you from the entire pack of your decade. Because that's extremely hard to do, right? Typically the swimmers that set world records are a little bit older than that, especially as time goes by. I do think Alex Bauman is there with Don Scholander in terms of there's probably the most people listening to this podcast who have no idea who he is. um, and yes, for all you IM nerds out there, I did check to see whether Hungarian Tomas Darny was better than Bauman, but Bauman was the better junior swimmer, and eventually Darny could overtook him on the senior stage, and they were very close to the same age. Okay, now we're getting to the female one.
But
before I answer this, Eric,
what about your the asterisk from, was it South Africa? That 12-year-old, wasn't that? In the 80s, no.
Who
broke the world
record? That was 1980. I'm not.
I don't know.
I'm not challenging him to a fight or anything because I've seen his Wikipedia photo, and I'm terrified. But I just do not believe that a South African 12-year-old in 1980 swam 10 seconds faster than any American 12-year-old has by 2022. It is not. I just don't think it happened. Nobody managed. I guess I didn't contact Craig Lord directly. Hopefully, Craig's still out there somewhere. He's got to be able to. We need Craig to weigh in on this, okay? And just back me up here, Craig, and let people know that this is not a real thing that happened. You've got the legacy of Nick Theory, and you got to carry it on and settle this because literally it doesn't seem like anybody else knows what happened. Okay, we're going to get to this female one. Now, Eric, before, I just want to milk the maximum amount of tension out of this one. When you think of great 14 to 17-year-old swimmers in the 1980s, what are some names that come from the United States? What are some names that come to mind to you? You think like, okay, Chris is about to announce
the
this.
80s?
Like, what could it be?
There's, I don't know. It's that one.
Can you think of one?
Janet, just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah, Janet Evans. She was pretty good, right?
She was good, but I guess just a matter. I can't remember when, how old she was at her peak powers, right? It seemed like it was probably a touch after. Yeah, she was just outside of that, I guess, picking nits in 88. So, but that's, yeah.
So Janet Evans was pretty amazing. And this was another one. This was like a Calkins, Mary T level internal debate for me. But ultimately, what I landed on was Dara Torres.
Really?
Dara Torres. Now, anybody that studies swimming history, if you are like me and you study records, or you're ever looking at those old school, or you're looking for old times in a NAG top 100, National Age Group top 100 or something, if you do that kind of research because you have a similar obsession to me, you stumble across some Dara Torres times and you do not believe what you see. Because, again, somebody that was way, way, way ahead of their time. She was a world record holder in the 50, the year she turned 17. And to me, okay, I think it is easier to be world dominant in a distance event when you're a teenager in the women's category. Historically, we've just seen a lot more of that. Then to name me one other, world record holding female in the 50 free.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to listen to this and go oh, you totally missed. I feel pretty good about this one. Since Dara Torres, okay? Break down that list. She was absolutely incredible for her time. Undoubtedly, again, Evans overall better. She had a wider event set, and you're right, a lot of those results for Evans kind of straddle the 17-18 line. She had a lot of really good results as an 18-year-old, where she's just sort of past eligible for what we're considering here. but she did have 3 world records, I think, while she was still eligible. So this is the one that I think people, because too, most of the nerds, in my opinion, are distance biased. So they're going to be Evans fans. Am I a little sprint biased? I'll leave that to the listener to decide. But I went with Torres on this one. Are you
I just
you're
I don't
just
know,
squirming
man.
uncomfortably in your
I don't
seat.
know. I mean, I guess you're talking about peak powers, and you're talking about kind of that apex style of swim in having the 50 free world record at 17. Is it's a power play card. Like, it's really hard to even consider topping that. For me, you're coming off of a time of where still the drug sheets are ahead of everything in science, so we don't know
Right.
what was going on with her. Not to imply anything with that, but just thinking about coming off of East Germany and everything else that was coming around the late 80s and early 90s, that it is a very impressive swimming situation. Just Janet Evans, man. I mean, just pure dominance at that time.
Yeah. I'm just reading here. She did set, so her 800 free record, which was just a bonkers swim, that was post juniors. That was 1989 when she went 8:16, which was a world record
Probably
for
18 turning 19
years. Yeah, so that was a record for 19 years. Her 1500 free, she did actually set while she was eligible for that one, and that one took until Kate Ziegler broke it, probably wearing a suit, 19 years later.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because it was 2007, so I mean, I don't know,
And
but we're sort of in that range.
Yeah, I guess you can argue a 50 over a 1500 in terms of where the degree of difficulty is right there, and just thinking about the what we know about biology and the ability for that aerobic monster thing versus like the 50, which you are
I don't know. Am I talking myself out of this, Eric? I'm feeling worse about my decision now that I just read that off.
I don't feel bad about your decision, but just because it's like, where do you then place weight in terms of how long did that 50 live versus the fact that you had to wait for a potentially suited Kate Ziegler to be able to take that record down. That's starts to get a little closer to a coin flip at the very least.
I'm changing my list on the
Okay.
fly. Janet, sorry, Dara, you're out. You're out. I believed in you until I really fully considered Janet Evans' resume, and then I came back to my senses and realized that Janet Evans is the best junior swimmer of 1980 to 1989. All right, let's get to 1990 and 1999. Again, as we get more recent, these names are going to get more familiar, I think, to most people. And the men's one, once we get into the rest of these eras, like, I think anybody who thinks about this for more than 5 minutes is going to be able to come up with the men's ones. Although the 2010 to 2019 one was a little bit interesting. However, 1990 to 1999, it has got to be Ian Thorpe. No question about it. His performances, he had a world record in the 200 and 400 free at before he turned 18. And his level of performance in those was just absolutely bonkers.
His 100 wasn't
and
bad
I
either.
think no, and I think that I didn't fully research this, so I apologize, but I think that 400 free has only been beaten by a suited Biederman. So, some of that, and I don't know if that 400 free was the actual world record is after, but he was also like really kind of at the peak of his powers at age 17 or so, or even the year. I think it was the Sydney Olympics. Now I need to look this up. Was he 18 at the Sydney Olympics or not?
Good question.
So he was eight. Yeah, he was an 82 birthday. So if you think about the Sydney Olympics, Ian Thorpe, he was still a junior eligible swimmer at that meet when he was the best swimmer in the entire world. So I don't know how you can beat that.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, that's about as good as it gets. All right, female. This is a little bit like some of these other ones here. We talk about it as just a timeless performance. I have Hungary's Kristina Eger-Zegi. Yes. She had a world record in the 100 and 200 backstroke. She lowered the 200 backstroke record by 2 full seconds as a junior swimmer, and that lasted as the world record in the 200 back for 17 years.
So fast.
Like, people kind of forget that, like, I feel like now the 90s is becoming the most underrated swimming decade, or even some of this 80s stuff where you just go, like, how many world records do we have that are that old right now? There was some stuff that was really timeless in terms of performance, and this was certainly one of them. The 100 doesn't stand up as well because she was just sort of just at a minute. We have so many people that can break a minute now, but she's 2:06 in the 2 back, and that still really holds up quite well in 2022. All right.
I don't have an argument for that one at all. Like, I don't even know.
No.
You can't even really come at
You got a good smile on your face when I said Eger-Zegi.
Yeah, because
as a backstroker, you were like,
yeah, it's like,
yeah.
When a backstroker can get on this list and get it on in a way that it's almost a foolproof argument at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's harder. It's a little bit harder when you're a stroke specialist, I think. You know, like, you got to be like a Mary T or Eger-Zegi. You got to do something that really stands out at the front because you may not necessarily be that good in an IM or a freestyle event. All right. 2000 to 2009. Again, this was, like I said, you don't have to think about these for a very long time. Male swimmer, Michael Phelps. Okay? Michael Phelps. Just for anyone that needed a refresher on a Michael Phelps resume, he had a world record in the 200 fly when he was 15 years old. And over the course of the time when he would have been junior eligible, he also set the world record in the 400 IM and the 200 IM. And that 200 IM was quite an old record when he broke it. I believe it was Saevinen, the Finnish swimmer, who had it for at least a decade at that point. And it was one of those that, you know, seemed like maybe it was like an Evans world record that people were just going to have a really hard time coming up against it. And he just kind of busted through it and then just, you know, changed the standard in that event so hard over the course of his career. And of course, was just 2004 Olympics, I guess, would have been his sort of 2000 for Thorpe, where he's still junior eligible age, and he's just, you know, crushing people.
Yeah, he revolutionized long course swimming in a lot of ways. And I mean, the underwater situation had been happening for quite some time, as you had talked about in the past. But him taking that to the 200 and the 400, it just proving how much the human being is capable of at some of these races, and just it's exciting because it's inspired some of the people that hopefully, if this list gets, you know, keeps going, you're going to see some of those names that were probably inspired by these swims or seeing the videos, because chances are some of those kids haven't really existed or been in swimming long enough yet. But
well, Popovich was born in 2004,
yeah.
I think. I think 2004. So I don't think he
probably
watched
Grady
Athens
footage his parents had on a VHS or something.
All right, female. This is a challenging one. this is almost it was a weird decade. Is all I have to say. And ultimately, I went with Katie Hoff. So two swimmers from the same club program, best junior swimmers of that decade. Katie Hoff was a triple gold winner at the World Championships when she was 16 years old. I think, and even she's probably sort of written a whole book around this topic. Like, she didn't have the Olympic performance that, like the expectation, I think, that had been put on her. But she actually bounced back and did extremely well a year later, and it's not remembered as much because it, didn't count as an Olympic year or whatever. But I don't put that kind of weight on stuff, and I think she was really amazing. The only other swimmer I could find that was sort of anywhere in Hoff's stratosphere for this time period would be Dagny Knudsen, but she just didn't have. She didn't have a resume. She had a sort of high end level performance, but she did not have anywhere near the full breadth of the resume.
Yeah, she also was never given a chance, but we won't get that far into it.
No, and that's why I feel like I got to include her on it, because
she's got to be kind of like an also ran.
It's got to be like, if not for, a completely reckless human being messing with her life, maybe she is a little bit closer to Hoff in this. And I think she's just got to be one of the most spectacular swimmers of that age I've ever seen. But just never quite, the results aren't there on the page, and we can't play a what if game in terms of what happened. Okay. 2010 to 2019. So we're getting into the real recent stuff, the last decade. Really interesting conversation that I had with myself about the male category for this one. And that is, how do I weigh, again, this is a bit of a De La Torres argument, but I think this one is much stronger. How do I weigh being really good in the various events? And so I went with Kyle Chalmers. Kyle Chalmers won Olympic gold in a year that he still would have been junior eligible in the 100 free. And I was saying before this podcast, like, when are we going to see that again? Well, actually, we just saw that, because I've decided for the purpose of this that worlds are equivalent to Olympics. So we've just seen Popovich actually one up that already in the next decade. But it is extremely rare. I tried to look through all these Olympics to find some other junior eligible swimmers that were medaling even in the 100 free. You can't find anybody.
It's always been kind of more of a quote unquote man's world when you are at this level of swimming, but even more so as we started to shift into that specialization. We've always kind of seen, but let's be honest, it's been way more about, you don't have to be good at all of them. If you can get a gold medal in one of them, it's an absolute feat. Yeah. So, I can't, just trying to even think who would have been in the tens that would have been a junior swimmer and done something like that. I can't.
Well, so my runner-up here would be Yannick Agnel, who did his 143.1, I think, in the 200 free while he was still a junior swimmer. And that's just, like in a very, 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 very good performance that was, not a world record. It might have been a world record if not for, I guess...
Phelps.
Sorry, Phelps. If not for Michael Phelps and Paul Biederman in a suit. So, it is probably one of the most amazing non-world record junior swims ever recorded, but it's not going to sit up there. And I don't think I think I got to give the edge to Chalmers for doing it in a shorter race. And that's why I went with him. Gosh, were there any good junior age female swimmers in this last decade?
Pretty big void competitively, I think.
Yeah. Do you know what, though? I will say, people, I'm going to give you my answer, but there was, I thought about this for 5 minutes. This wasn't a slam dunk. Of course, it's Katie Ledecky, obviously, okay? Because she's Katie Ledecky. I mean, again, if we would need a refresher, she won the Olympics in the 800 free as a junior age swimmer, and she went on to break world records in, I believe, the 400, 800, and 1500 as a junior age swimmer. Incredibly impressive. Of course, there's everything she's accomplished after that. You know, she made the transition to senior quite smoothly as well, and she continues to be up at that level. But Missy Franklin, also in this decade, set a world record as a junior age swimmer. And she was, you can make it's not a successful argument, but you can mount a versatility argument for Missy Franklin because she swam freestyle and backstroke. So, you know, she had kind of a wider breadth, but ultimately, you know, she's not so amazing in the one race, and she doesn't have 3 races the way that Ledecky does in the same decade. So you got to give it to Ledecky. But it was at least I had to think about it a little bit and do my math.
It's kind of an argument we're having that did come up near each other, but not, you know, at the same time. And what we were seeing from Missy in the moment, if you could make the decision at a particular time, then it would obviously be her. But then letting the 10s finish out, and then Katie Ledecky doing what she did, it's like you just take that trophy right away from Missy and just hand it over to Katie Ledecky.
Yeah. All right. So I actually did 2020 to 2029 just because I wanted to include David Popovich on this list. And I think we've done enough podcasts on David Popovich, and you can find enough out there to know, you know, what level he's at. I mean, he set a world record in the 100 freestyle as a junior swimmer, so that's even sort of one-upping Chalmers and puts him in a conversation with a lot of the other decade winners on this list, and we'll sort of get to that broader argument in a second. But you know, I kind of feel two ways about the two. Like, so I did sort of pick a female one too, but I think it is extremely unlikely we will see a better junior swimmer, male swimmer, than David Popovich in this decade. I would put the chances at, I don't know, a fraction of 1%.
Yeah.
Okay. Female, I guess I think I went with Lydia Jacoby.
It is really, like, yeah. It's just like it's.
But I don't expect that to hold up for
like
a decade.
With Franklin coming before Ledecky, it's the general progression of women in this age group and where they're going. There's so much fast swimming happening, you know, let alone in America on itself. Just thinking about the 13, 14, 15-year-olds right now that are coming up behind her.
If you just do basic math, there's somebody that's 10 years old right now who could be eligible for beating that. So how am I supposed to have any idea? I think it's likely that she will be usurped, but we'll see.
That 10-year-old is 16 in 2028. So
yeah. All right, now let's decide who is the best. I mean, we need to first, I guess we got to give it to Don Scholander, right, as the greatest male junior swimmer of all time. So we just figure out who number 2 is, right, Eric?
Not at all. I did come up with an argument for the women's side, but let's get through the guys' side here. As you so
Okay.
desperately want to put Don Scholander above Ian Thorpe or Michael Phelps at this point.
Okay. So if we have our male list: Don Scholander, Brian Goodell, Alex Bauman, Ian Thorpe, Michael Phelps, Kyle Chalmers, David Popovich. Who's the best, in your opinion, on that list?
I mean, I have to go with the one true GOAT, and that's Michael Phelps. You know, you're talking about peak swims, and we keep comparing world records. You had how many as a junior swimmer?
3.
And that's...
And fly and IM,
yeah.
which I think is important.
Yeah. And I really don't even... I can't even imagine putting anything up against that before or after. Like, just the sheer apex of junior swimming, and being able to hold 3 different world records in specifically 2 different disciplines. You don't see that really anywhere else on the guys list. So
yeah, and I think you're right. I think that, all Don Scholander jokes aside, Thorpe is close when you just isolate them for these junior years. You know, he's actually very close, but he's not there.
yeah,
Like, he's just not quite got the versatility that Phelps had at the same age. He's essentially a middle distance freestyler.
And you also have to look at with Phelps is that we also don't know the what could have been scenario with him because of his versatility and what events he decided not to swim in order to be able to do some of these things. Like he came on during swimming in the U.S. at some of the absolute peak backstroke power. Like it's a very hard 1-2 to crack into, and especially when you have somebody like Aaron Pearsall, who no matter what would happen, he found a way to get his hand on the wall first. And just with the conflicts with the 200 free and some of the great 200 freestylers that we had and the world had in the 2000s. So
and Popovich, I think he comes just behind Thorpe as well. Like, so if I were to do my top 3, I would go Phelps, Thorpe, Popovich.
Yeah,
in that order.
He's making grown men look like junior swimmers. Just the way that he's able to get out and dominate like that, and to be able to swim that 100 as he did, and that is definitely one of those events that's in a man's world. And be able to go the time that he did. That's one of those things where it's like, if you're able to provide context in and around it, that's a very close third. Like Ian Thorpe in a race, this is touching out Popovich. If we had seen a more insane 200 freestyle out of Popovich, I think he would definitely jump Ian Thorpe. But
I think there's kind of 3 tiers here. I think those guys are on their own tier. I think Goodell and Scholander is another tier. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about who's better than who in that. And then Bauman and Chalmers are sort of the bottom tier of the 7 greatest junior swimmers of all time.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's jump over to the women, because I think that's a lot harder.
Yeah.
And you said you have some notes.
I think, and I don't know if it dawned on me after we got past this decade, and I really didn't ask, because with some of this stuff, it's about overlapping on specific decades and when things happen. So I think one thing that we definitely missed in that 70s, 80s is a young woman named Cynthia Woodhead.
Okay, I'm really glad you brought that up because I actually had that on the bottom of here, like somebody that just got lost in this whole thing, but it was incredible. Cynthia Sippy
Yes.
Woodhead going 158 in the 200 free at I think she was either 15 or 16 years old when she did that performance.
She was actually, it's kind of funny. You know, I'm right now I'm on the most reliable source for information like this, and that is Wikipedia.
Yeah, actually, it is though.
She was a junior swimmer when she broke the long course 50 freestyle world record.
Yeah, but that was when that was like when the 50 was barely even.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Like they just made it like a year before that or something.
Then I guess I'll just defer to her 200 freestyle world record.
But that one was pretty phenomenal. Yeah, no, that 158 too. Yeah. So she's probably better like as a junior swimmer than some of the names on this list, and she just wasn't.
The 1980 thing
happened to. And she happened to be in the decade with Mary T. and Tracy Calkins.
Yeah.
So just the most brutal competition.
Yeah. In 1980, the number one ranked in 100, 200, 400, and 800 freestyle.
Yeah.
That's an incredible range.
So sort of like Katie Ledecky if she was also the best 100 freestyle.
Yeah, if you shifted Katie Ledecky just at down one versus the up one. So Katie Ledecky is 2 to 15. Sippy Woodhead is 1 to 8. And maybe only because she didn't have the opportunity to swim to 15, which if she's going to be the number one in the 8, she sure as heck's going to have a chance to be the number one in the 1500. But
so another way that I cheated on this list, Eric, as I'm doing a little research in the background, I can see already a glaring mistake, and this will sort of probably clarify who I think number one is here. I made the mistake, actually. Mary T. was, the year she turned 17 was the year she broke the world records in brown deer. So her 205 and 57 in the 100, 200, 100 butterfly, those were as a junior swimmer.
Okay.
And that was in the 80s.
That was in the 80s.
So I could have actually, if I think I sort of knew that, but I was doing in the rules. I was like, you can't be 2 decades. but if I didn't have that as a rule, I probably would have picked her for the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah. So and this definitely, in my mind,
I'd say she's the one.
She's 80s, and Sippy Woodhead is the 70s.
Oh, I see. No. See, now you're contributing to the list.
When you think about it, I mean, it's hard because
you think that 158 200 free is better than a 207 2 fly in that time period.
Well, I mean, I get if you're going to try to get Mary T on the list twice, it's kind of hard because she's overlapped those. I don't know. But if you're going to keep her in the 70s, then I'm taking Sippy in the 80s, and I know your whole argument again, but you're 16 breaking the 50 freestyle world record while also being the best ranked 100 through 800 at the same time. I mean, that's just a prowess in freestyle that, like you said, because of the boycott, we never really got to see. So very fortunate for her and as a swim fan that she was able to make it to an Olympics and get a silver and a 200, but we never got to see apex powers at the Olympic stage for Sippy. So
okay, so I'm still going with Mary T. though as my best. She's my top female in this entire list, junior. I just think 205 in the 200 as a junior swimmer is like that makes you number one.
It's an insane time for a junior. I think it's the longevity of that event and how that event has gotten so much deeper right now, and how many women are in that 204 to 207 range, and
Yeah.
Agerzagi's not too terribly behind in terms of the longevity
No,
of
but
that
who is
record.
behind though? Who's next after Mary T? I think that's the hardest thing.
Yeah, I
And let's throw Sippy in there because we gave her kind of
yeah
like a coach's pick because she's so good. So, I mean, like let's start matching these people up, like Ledecky versus Agerzegi. Who's who's a better junior swimmer? Like Ledecky has another event,
yeah.
but in terms of the performances, it's hard to say how long those Ledecky records are going to stay. We know that Eggerzegi's 200 had a long shelf life, so I think the ceiling of performance there is maybe a little bit higher.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
this is
No,
hard.
it's tough. I just, it. I guess I give. It's hard when you're trying to justify it in your own head or give it weight, or you look at what in the context of the era that it was, and Agerzegi's swim was phenomenal in a lot of ways, otherworldly. What Katie Ledecky did in the events that she did it in the way that she did it relative to her competition. I mean, it was just we were seeing an evolution in freestyle on the women's side in her approach, and it's no fault against freestyles beforehand, and it's not to downgrade any of what we saw, but
Don't be so
we
nice.
saw a very aggressive, quote unquote, male like approach to the stroke. There was a power there, and there was a stroke rate and a power in something that we had not seen before when we saw
Mm.
her swim that event. And it's really, in much the way that Michael Phelps changed the way that we thought about being underwater in long course races beyond the 100 backstroke. The way that she changed the way that we can be the best in freestyle on the women's side. It just, yeah, I have to give her the nod as the like 2A versus 2B versus 2C. It's like it's a touch out. They're all separated by like 1/100th to me, and she's got that edge.
So I'm gonna. I guess there's probably that all the biases right in any of this. I'm giving it to Egerzegi. I think there's a bit of an American bias that
Coming through the
that
screen right
goes
now.
in, coming through the screen. As a Euro, I gotta give some respect to her, and I would probably. It's interesting. I'm so glad you brought up Woodhead because I would go probably here, Egerzegi, Ledecky, Woodhead as my 2, 3, 4.
I could see an argument for that. It's hard because you can't go back. You can't go back and see what would have happened later that summer in 1980 with what Sippy Woodhead would have done with a couple more months
And
of
then what do you do
training
with
and
Janet?
rest and
What?
whatever.
Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry, but what do you do with Janet Evans? Because like she's the Ledecky of her era. Like, what's the difference between Ledecky and Janet Evans
um,
as junior swimmers? Like, what is the difference?
I guess I don't know. There's just such a and yeah, like you said, in the same way that Ledecky separated herself from her competitors as she did. Same thing
It's just too hard.
with Janet.
It's too hard. It's too. I think we'll be able to answer this question in 10 years
Yeah,
because in 10 years we'll have better context for how Ledecky swims have held up, and then it'll be easier to compare to Evans because they maybe if they don't hold up, then I think you might like look at this
yeah.
historically and actually put
I mean,
Evans ahead of
it's
her.
okay for them to tie in the moment. Not that we want to have
Yeah,
ties. We're always trying
and
to rank
Debbie
everything, but it's like it's
and Debbie Meyer is essentially the Janet Evans Ledecky of her era. That's why another reason why I went back to the 60s. I mean,
yeah,
you really you're going to get historical bias because now the times don't look fast.
no.
I think
But
she's
in the
like
context,
9:15 in the 800 or something, but she was crazy fast
yeah,
for her time. Yeah. Okay, so we're just going to throw in the towel. We're going to say it's too hard. Eric, I think I'm so glad I had you on.
Yeah,
Folks.
otherwise
I don't think you were feeling confident.
You've just been talking to yourself the whole time, and that would have been boring.
Yeah, yeah. I think despite your
Internet helps.
denigrating
Internet
of your
helps.
own, yeah, no, but despite your denigration of your own nerdiness, you had a lot to contribute.
I didn't. I didn't have the time or the desire to go as deep as you do with the decades, but I appreciate your desire to unearth a lot of this stuff and bring the world of swimming from where it was to where it now is to younger audience, especially your swimmers who hopefully have made it all this way into the podcast.
Yeah, yeah. This is the point at which I know you're supposed to remind me to do all of our plugs.
Yeah.
So I've reminded myself to do all of our plugs. If you listen to this, you got an opinion, especially you can interact with the YouTube version of this and give us your opinion. Tell me I'm absolutely wrong about all the woodheads out there. I made up a name for woodhead fans, woodheads. Okay, all the woodheads out there, you come, get on there, give us your argument. Tell us, what we missed. All the Calkins people, okay, who think she was robbed, get on there, like and subscribe. Okay, subscribe on iTunes. I think I'm a few keystrokes away from figuring out how to publish this podcast on Spotify. Which means it'll be a few months until I do. And for positive psychology-based content, it's Christy_coach. On Instagram. Eric, did I miss anything plug-wise?
If people have ideas, where can they submit them?
Oh, yeah, for stuff they want to hear. Oh, just put them in the YouTube comments. Eric reads them. And sometimes I do too. And we try to stay on top. We try to interact with people there. So if you want to interact, please do that. And then I'll just say thanks for listening. Eric, thanks for joining me.
Not a problem.
And until next week.
Thanks.